Welcome to part two of a two-part Your Space session. My name is Van, and this is my co-facilitator, Victoria, and we are both from Child and Adolescent Services.
Hi there.
This session is for parents, caregivers, and service providers who are supporting children, youth, and families navigating through the impact of parental separation and divorce. I want to take a moment and share with you that the material informing this talk is adapted from our Growing the Roots of Resilience group. This group came about as a result of the contribution and the creativity of our dedicated staff and interns. We are grateful to children and their families for the opportunity to learn from their experience. We listen to their message of the importance to support the need of families impacted by separation and divorce issues, and we hope that the information will act as a helpful starting point for families as they make their way through some challenging times. For our time together, Victoria and I will offer education about the impact of parental conflict on child development and well-being, also build on caregiver skills to enhance communication and conflict management skills, as well as how to be more responsive to their child's emotional needs. Towards the end of our time together, Victoria will walk you through the differences between parallel versus co-parenting practices. What you'll also notice in front of you will be a box that indicates or lists helpful links. You will want to take some time to go through these and click on the various different links, as these are other resources that may be helpful to you and your family. There are also a few links that are listed as videos. These are also really helpful videos that Victoria and I think would be interesting, as well as to help illustrate some of the things that we are hoping to share with you. As we go through the session, I would like to invite you to consider the following case scenario. Note that the case scenario has been made up to help us facilitate the conversation. We understand and know that each family situation is different, and how your child responds will also depend on their personality, their temperament, how they cope, the family history, their social support network, as well as the community in which they live. So here in the case scenario, you have Lena and James, who are parents to Stephanie, age 7, and Carlos, age 12. Carlos was suspended from school twice this September for being verbally aggressive towards peers. We can see that Carlos and Stephanie's relationship is volatile. They fight on a daily basis, and mom worries that potentially Carlos' behavior may escalate, that he will one day maybe be physically aggressive towards his sister. On the other hand, we see that Stephanie mostly keeps to herself. She cries a lot at night, and she has difficulty speaking up to others. From both parents, we hear that transition times between the two homes can be quite challenging. Although this is a made-up case scenario, some of the issues that have been highlighted here, we certainly have heard from the children and families that we work with. What we know is that every child is unique and will react to changes differently. What we're describing here around some of the children's developmental needs is not absolute. Consider it a range of behaviors that caregivers may observe depending on the age of the child. So for instance, when we look at school-age children between the ages of 6 to 8, we can see that they are starting to expand their social network. They may feel guilty and may believe that they are to blame for the parent's separation. They may also engage in behaviors where it may look as if they are taking sides. They can experience difficulty in being able to take on or understand more than one perspective. They express fear of losing relationship with either one of their parents or possibly both of their parents. And/or what we often hear is that children may have fantasies about parents getting back together. Some of the things that you may want to watch for would be whether or not there are changes to their level of emotionality, externalizing behavior. And some of these things refer to things such as um, outwardly displaying their anger. It could be slamming doors, stomping up, having a temper tantrum. They can complain about physical symptoms, tummy aches, headaches, unable to sleep. We may see some regressive behavior. What this can include may be something like where a child has been toilet trained, and yet we may see signs of them starting to wet themselves, whether it be in the home or outside of the home, and or you might see that there are changes to their level of involvement in their daily activities. One of the important things to note with this is that you know your children best in terms of where things are at for them. So what you want to be able to watch for is, has there been any changes to the patterns of how they may usually behave or respond to situations? Here are some things to consider in terms of how you can help, particularly with kids between this age range. Tell your child that you still love them and will always take care of them. Reassure them that they have not done anything wrong and that there is nothing they can do to get their parents back together. Give them information that is appropriate to their age and stage of development about what will change. For example, where they will live, arrangements for time with each parent, and any changes to their routine. Let them know that their perspectives is important, but that the parents will make the decisions. Give them opportunities to talk about how they are feeling and to hear about other children who have gone through separation and divorce. Preteens developmental needs. These are children between the ages of 9 and 12. At this stage, we notice that children are more focused on friendships and developing more independence. They may require emotional support and guidance, and while they can see separation and divorce as an adult issue, they may still be angry with their parents. And they may also think in absolutes. It's either this or that. And it may be difficult for them to understand more of the gray area. Similar to children, we do want to watch for the preteens' emotionality. Are they acting out? Are they displaying physical symptoms? Or are they complaining about physical symptoms? We want to watch to see whether or not they're starting to disengage and are socially withdraw. Are you noticing that they're gravitating towards a new peer group? What do you think about the new peer group? Do you have concerns about the new peer group? And or are you supportive of the new peer group? Preteens may also hold feelings of shame or embarrassment as a result of the changes to the family dynamics. They may engage in blaming parents or a parent. And lastly, they may try to take care of the parent or take on too many responsibilities. Some preteens may want to be treated like adults. There are times caregivers may rely on their children for support. While preteens may want to play this role, it's not appropriate for them to take on this level of responsibility because we know that in the long term, it can cause emotional problems. Some of the ways that you can help. Listen to your preteen's feelings and concern. Try to stay open-minded and don't judge. Don't lean on your preteen for emotional support. Make sure that you establish and maintain a support network for yourself. Do not give your child responsibilities that are inappropriate to their age and stage of development. For example, too many childcare or household responsibilities. This is a quote from a 10-year-old young child that had participated in one of our groups, and he indicated to one of his parents, "Just because you're mad at my other parent, why are you punishing me?" One of the things that kids identify as being very difficult for them is when they're being used as messengers or informants, or when they're exposed to negative statements or criticism about a parent from another parent. And or I would add to that another adult who is in a caregiving role. When the parent may engage the child by asking them to take side in a conflict, they feel stuck in the middle when they're being told too many details or inappropriate information about adult issues. And also when a parent is trying to interfere with the time that the other parent spends with the child, as well as not allowing the child to bring certain belongings to the other parent's home. These situations add to the stress and struggles that children experience.
So next I'm just going to talk about ways that we can help children of all ages. One of the most important things is the way we take care of ourselves in order to support children. You also want to show your affection in words and actions. You want to create an environment where children are protected from conflict. You don't want to involve children in adult problems. You want to allow your child to express feelings. You want to avoid speaking of the other parent in negative terms. And you also want to focus on strengthening your parenting skills. Moreover, you may want to spend time alone with each child. You want to maintain as much routine as possible. You want to give children opportunities to visit with relatives and spend time with friends. You want to stay in touch with the child care provider and teachers, especially to get updates about their behavior and emotional expression at school. You want to set reasonable rules and limits for your children's behavior according to their stage of development. And if you make promises to your children, keep them. Support your child with the opportunity to have a relationship with the other parent. So next we're just going to talk about how we build strong relationships between caregivers and their children. Here we have a metaphor known as parenting with two hands. On one hand, we focus on building connections. This looks like providing warmth and nurturing, doing things together, family activities, outings, and being thoughtful towards one another. This is the personal side of parenting. On the other side, we have the business side of parenting. And this is how to effectively correct a child's behavior with use of appropriate structure, boundaries, and meaningful consequences. This could look like responsibilities, homework, household routines, or bedtime. In regards to the personal side of parenting, you want to be curious about your child's feelings and thoughts. You also want to ask non-judgmental questions. For instance, if your child's in trouble at school one day, you don't want to say, "Why did you get in trouble?" You may want to say, "Tell me about what happened today." You want to accept the internal experience of the child. Otherwise, the child will learn to hide it. So if you thought, "I was mad at you," no wonder you did that. You want to be motivated by a desire to understand, not to change feelings and thoughts of the child. Most important here is that the personal side of parenting is needed for the business side of parenting to be effective. In regards to the business side of parenting, we're looking at structure. For example, the when and then rule. When you have your bath, then we can read a book together. We have boundaries, which means only giving choices and freedoms that the kid can successfully manage. It's setting limits and boundaries with empathy. For example, I know it's hard to stop playing video games because you want to keep playing and your friends are online, and it's time to go to bed and I want you to be well rested for tomorrow. We may only judge the behavior, not the child. We're evaluating whether the behavior is acceptable or not, and we're not evaluating whether the child is acceptable or not. Further to the business side of parenting, we have an image here demonstrating the concept of parenting from what we can see. Here we have an umbrella, and the shell of that umbrella is known as the protective shell. Everything that is beneath the surface for the child, what's under the umbrella, feeds the child's outward actions. So what's on the protective umbrella shell? The child's outward behaviors feed into the parent's underlying feelings and experiences. For example, if the child's outward behaviors are like yelling or pushing or crying, this feeds the parent's response. For example, frustration, exhaustion, disappointment. Now, the parent's outward expression, which may look like yelling, commanding, ignoring, will continue to reinforce the child's underlying experience, which is what we're really trying to understand in order to effectively correct behavior. Continuing from our previous slide, we have the iceberg diagram. So here, the underlying feelings include embarrassment, shame, disgust. When the child experiences such feelings, you may see outward behaviors that look like anger, sleep issues, defiance. So what we're really trying to understand is what is going on beneath the surface of the water. What are the underlying feelings that are feeding the behavior?
And if we go back to the case scenario that was offered at the beginning of our conversation, we can map and wonder about, for example, Carlos' behavior. Some of the behaviors that was alluded to was Carlos' expression of anger and, possible frustration and whatever else is happening for him at school. And then if we dig underneath the behavior, there are some of the feelings and experiences that Victoria had spoken about. Likewise, we can also map Stephanie's behavior onto this iceberg, where outwardly we may see avoidance. Perhaps, we did hear that she also withdraws. Underneath, there may be experiences of anxiety, helplessness, hurt, feeling of discomfort. Okay? So these are just some examples of the importance for caregivers to be able to connect with the emotional experience underneath in order to help address and support the external behaviors that we see. Next, we're going to move to how do we help to weather the emotional storm? One of the things that's really important for us to keep in mind is that we know that children learn from their environment, and parents are the most important role models. Parents and caregivers play a crucial role in helping their children develop emotion regulation skills. It is imperative that parents are aware of their own emotions and the way in which they manage them in front of and with their children. Building on to Victoria's suggestion earlier about the importance of parents and caregivers practicing self-care, we believe that it is equally important for us as caregivers to be aware of our own emotional responses and caregiving style. Having an idea of how we respond to situations, especially when we are in distress and we are trying to manage crisis situations, will allow us to examine what's working and perhaps add new tools or strategies that will be helpful to our child. So what I'm going to be inviting you to do is to consider which of the 3 types of emotional responses Next, I'm going to invite you to consider which animal archetypes or emotional responses represents your parenting style, especially in stressful situations. First, we have the animal archetype of the jellyfish, where there may be too much emotion displayed, where the jellyfish may feel like a lot of emotion and display a lot of emotion and may struggle to keep their own emotions in check and becomes distressed in response to their loved one's distress. I'm going to ask you to look over to the ostrich, where there may be too little emotion. With the ostrich, this may be a caregiving style or an emotional response style where they may avoid seeing, thinking, and dealing with emotions. And their method of support may involve the family or the individual using or relying on very practical strategies. And if we move to the middle, we have the St. Bernard. And what I want you to notice that although it says that, the goal may be for caregivers to be more of a balance between the jellyfish and the ostrich, we may find that there are times when we are one or the other. And I wouldn't want you folks to think that there is a right type, because all of us have our own individual style. The question here is, in the way that we are emotionally responding to our children, can we notice whether or not our emotional response style is helping or hindering our efforts to support our kids?
So Van, I often hear caregivers say, well, I am the St. Bernard. I don't identify with the other two types, other two responses. What would you say in that case?
I think that that's a really fair comment. And I would say that, again, whether folks are identifying with the St. Bernard, the ostrich, or the jellyfish, is to be able to take a step back and notice whether or not their response style is getting is having the kind of impact that they would like for their child. Okay. Next, I'd like you to consider which animal archetypes best represents your parenting style. Again, especially in stressful situations. On the left-hand side, you see the kangaroo. This metaphor is used to describe caregivers who seek to protect their loved ones from both the experience and the pain, as well as the challenges of life. In fact, the kangaroo may try to prevent pain and make everything right. As we move to the far right and look at the rhinoceros, this would be a caregiving style of a caregiver who would frequently use logic and who would be quick to move to problem solving to try to fix the problems or issues, and would not address emotional experiences. And then when we move to the middle, we have the archetype of the dolphin. The dolphin is an example of a caregiving style of someone who would provide gentle guidance, security and safety. They do not engage in overly managing, but will take care and or take the lead when needed. And there is an offer of a balance of caring and control. Again, I would invite you to consider which of these caregiving styles that you notice best describes you in times of distress. And in having this awareness, I would also invite you to think about, is your caregiving style or emotional response style having the kind of impact and on how you're supporting your kids and whether or not your children are finding it helpful? Having this knowledge will allow us to shift in the areas that we need to. So now we're going to move to, how do we help our kids when they are emotional? And again, I want to highlight that when we talk about kids who are emotional, we're not just talking about children or youth who are externally emotional, where they're crying, they're throwing a temper tantrum. We're also talking about kids who may be more internalizing, where they socially withdraw. They are sitting and crying, but they're doing so quietly. So there's a range of emotions that our children, depending on who they are and their coping style and how they manage, that they will show. So the goal here in utilizing these emotional coaching steps is to help our kids to become good at feeling, not to feel good. When parents learn to become emotion coaches, children will learn and feel that their parents understand and that they get it and that they are not alone in their experiences. They also learn that they can deal with emotional challenges and learn to regulate their own emotions and problem solve. The idea here is that with your support in coaching them along through these emotional experiences, they will come to internalize this experience of you coaching them, and over time they will adopt and develop these skills for themselves. By using the skill of emotion coaching, parents can improve their relationship with their child. And again, I'm going to highlight that this approach is less about wanting our kids to feel good and more about wanting them to be good at feeling. This next slide here invites us to look at the steps of emotion coaching. You'll notice that there is a video link. This is an example of active listening and or validation. I would encourage you to look at the link because it helps to illustrate the steps in what we are offering here. Step 1 is to notice and label the emotion. Then we want to be able to validate the emotion to show that you understand their emotional experiences. So what that might look like would be something like, wow, I can sense that you're feeling really sad right now. You're showing that you're noticing the emotion. You're labeling the emotion as being sad. And next, what you're going to do is you're going to validate the emotion, and that would sound like, I can sense that you're feeling sad because you just told me about a breakup that you had with a friend that you've been friends with for a long time. Step 2 would be meet the associated need, where it could be that our child may need us to soothe them, to help them organize and understand their feelings, or to help them problem solve. Our experiences has been is that when we do a good job of step 1, that is noticing, labeling the emotion, and validating the emotion, sometimes we may not need to fix. And if we do, I would suggest checking in with your child to see how you can help. And it could sound something like, this sounds like it's a really difficult and challenging situation for you. How can I help? What would you like me to do to make the situation easier for you?
So Van, sometimes it can be difficult to use emotion coaching, especially when the child or youth is engaging in undesirable behavior or inappropriate behavior that we feel is inappropriate. Because fear around validating that behavior could mean we're accepting the behavior. What would you say in a situation like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Victoria. And I think that what we're saying here is that we are trying to validate and explore the child's emotional experience, which is what, going back to the umbrella and or the iceberg, that these are the emotional experiences underneath the iceberg. And by supporting and validating the emotional experience, we are not communicating to our kids that we are accepting their behavior. So for example, if we use Carlos and Stephanie as an example, Carlos is very upset with Stephanie and is yelling at Stephanie and or, taking things from her room and whatnot. How we would validate Carlos' emotional experience would look something like, Carlos, I can tell that you're very angry with your sister right now because you were in the middle of your game and she switched the TV off. So by saying what we did, we're validating his emotional experience, and we're not saying that it's okay that he is being, aggressive towards his sister or taking things out of her room. So if I were to continuing on with the validation, it would sound like, I can see that you're really angry with your sister because she turned off the TV when you were in the middle of a game. And Carlos, we have a rule in this home that we do not take things or break things that belong to someone else. So what you're doing is you're separating the behavior from the person, and you're also supporting and saying, yeah, I get it. I get that you would be upset because your sister had turned off the TV when you were like winning in the game. However, what is not acceptable is you being mean towards her because of it. Is there a way that we can manage this situation so that we're also being kind and caring of each other? That also reminds me that one of the tips that I often use to remind myself when I think about the steps of emotional coaching is that what we're simply asking you folks to do is to be a mirror. That when we are validating someone's emotional experience, all that we're doing is we're mirroring back what we see. And if you look into a mirror, does the mirror judge you? Mine doesn't. My mind judges me, but the mirror doesn't judge you. It simply reflects back what it sees. So maybe you might want to keep that in mind, is that step one is really being a mirror and mirroring back what you see. Carlos, I can see that you're angry. I can see that you're upset because you're going into your sister's room, you're taking things out and you're breaking them. And because your sister turned off the TV when you were in the middle of the game. Judging would mean, Carlos, you shouldn't have done that. That's not very kind or nice of you. You should never hit your sister or do these things. You're an awful kid. That's being judgmental of the child himself, as opposed to being able to understand the emotional experience. Does that make sense, Victoria?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, I would encourage folks to look at the YouTube video of an example of how the parent validates through active listening to the child as she was sitting there being very upset. Okay? These are some tips around shortcuts to validation. You can start with, I can see how that might make you feel. And if you can come up with 2 or 3 reasons, that would be ideal. And then, I don't know what to say exactly, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. Another starting with could be, I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you because 3 reasons. Or, no wonder you're feeling this way because. And the second ending possible, and these are just some suggestions, is I just want to let you know that I hear what you're saying, and I can imagine it's really hard, Carlos, when somebody interrupts the game and you were winning. Can you and I work together to ensure that this doesn't happen? One of the things that I'm often reminded of is we want to be very careful of the word but. Because if we were to start by saying, I can see how that might make you feel angry, but everything that we validated ahead of the but now becomes a moot point. And I find that when we use the word but, it can actually sometimes escalate or get people feeling defensive.
Could you give me an example of that type of statement?
Sure, yeah. Well, I can use the one that's here. No wonder you're feeling really sad right now, but we need to get going to the appointment. Or no wonder you're feeling really frustrated right now, but you've got to get this project done. It's due tomorrow.
It's a lot more frustrating when I hear it as a response.
Sure, because it's almost as if, well, yeah, I hear that you're really upset, frustrated, angry, whatever the feeling might be, but that doesn't matter because we've got this other stuff that we've got to do, right? But I've got to go grocery shopping. I've got to get you to an appointment, and you're going to be late for work, activity, whatever the case might be. Okay? So instead, really watch and see if you can exchange the word but to either because or and.
And so next we're going to be heading into our last section, growing together. And this has to do with how do we come together with our ever-changing family units. So we've got a wonderful quote here. The quality of our lives depends not on whether or not we have conflicts, but on how we respond to them. I really appreciate this quote because it normalizes conflict. Conflict is going to exist in our lives no matter what we do. The only thing that we can do is seek to reduce it or to contain it. When it comes to conflict, we also have to be aware of what is actually within our control versus what is in someone else's control. So what are we able to control? Our words, behaviors, actions, ideas, and the consequences of our actions. But I can't control another person's words, behavior, actions, ideas, and the consequences of their actions. Regardless of the other person, they are responsible for their own actions. By one parent or caregiver refusing to engage in conflictual behaviors, the other caregiver's hostility may diminish over time. It's actually the person with the least amount of interest or engagement that may have the most power and control in conflict scenarios. Next, we're going to talk about different parenting practices. So we have parallel parenting, and then on the next slide, we're going to be talking about co-parenting. What I want to stress here is that there is no right or wrong way of parenting, and that your style of parenting may change over time. For instance, you may go from parallel parenting to co-parenting, and then back again to parallel parenting. Another example may be that you use elements of both depending on the situation. So I'm going to review these, and you can think about which works best for you in your own situation. So in regards to parallel parenting, parents communicate over emergencies. Parents use email, a third party, or a parenting notebook to communicate. Phone calls aren't typically used except for in the case of emergency. Major decisions are reached through a parenting plan, a third party, or with legal agreements and are communicated rather than discussed. Households tend to be separate. Each makes decisions about the child when the child is in their respective household. Parents work separately for the best interests of the child. Written parenting plans or court orders may be followed to guide parenting, and parents use a third party or an external authority in order to avoid conflict or negotiate changes in writing. Each parent is responsible for their own relationship with the child or children. For example, you must talk to your mom or you must talk to your dad about that. Some tips when engaging in this type of parenting: do not interfere with your child's other parent. Adopt a business-like attitude and use common courtesy. Try not to plan activities for the child during the other parent's time, as it may be better for a child to miss an event than to witness conflict. Stay focused on the present. Be specific about the problem and have possible solutions ready. Keep your child's best interests in mind when discussing matters with the other parent. And remember, the goal is just to keep conflict to a minimum. On our next slide, we have co-parenting. So with co-parenting, parents tend to communicate more frequently and even regularly. Parents communicate in person or over the phone. Major decisions about the child or children are jointly discussed as needed. Parents work together as needed to resolve issues related to the child. Parents work together in the best interest of the child. It also allows for more informal schedule changes with direct communication between the parties. Parents may be able to discuss issues related to the child or children with each other. Again, there is no ideal way of parenting. This is totally dependent on your unique situations, and you may gravitate between them at any given time. Next, we're going to talk about ways to reduce conflict, BIF responses. So brief, this means keeping responses brief. This helps reduce the chances of prolonged and angry exchanges. The more you say, the more material the other person has to criticize. Keeping it brief says that you don't wish to get into conflictual dialogue or keep one going. You don't have to defend yourself to someone you disagree with. Informative. Looking at just the facts is a good idea. Focus on accurate statements you want to make, not on the inaccurate statements the other person made. Avoid negative comments, sarcasm, and threats. Avoid personal remarks about the other person's intelligence or moral behavior. If the other person has a high conflict personality, you're not going to have success in reducing the conflict with personal attacks. Personal attacks rarely lead to insight or positive change. You want dialogue to be friendly and fair. You might be tempted to react in anger. You're more likely to achieve your goals by responding in a friendly manner. Consciously thinking about a friendly, fair, or neutral response will increase your chances of getting a similar response in return. So if your goal is to end the conflict, then being friendly has the greatest likelihood of success. Don't give the other person a reason to get defensive and keep responding. This doesn't mean that you have to be overly friendly. You just want to sound relaxed and non-antagonistic. If appropriate, say you recognize their concerns. Brief comments that show your empathy and respect will generally calm the other person down, even if only for a short time. Last, you want to keep dialogue firm and factual. In a non-threatening way, clearly tell the other person your information or your position. You want to avoid comments that leave an opening, such as, I hope you will agree with me that, because this invites the other person to tell you, I don't agree. Sound confident and don't ask for more information if you want to end the back and forth. It often helps to just repeat the key information using the same words. So finally, we've included the Bill of Rights for children involved in separation and divorce. We felt it was important to highlight these because sometimes the rights of children do get overlooked in difficult or complex situations. So children have the right not to be asked to choose sides between parents. They also have the right not to be told the details of the legal proceedings going on between their parents. They have the right not to be told bad things about the other parent's personality or character. They have the right to privacy when talking to either parent on the phone. They have the right not to be questioned by one parent after spending time with the other parent. They have the right not to be asked to be a messenger from one parent to the other. They have the right not to be asked by one parent to tell the other parent untruths. They have the right not to be used as a confidant regarding adult matters. They have the right to express feelings, whatever those feelings may be. And they have the right to choose not to express certain feelings. They have the right to be protected from parental conflict, and they have the right not to be made to feel guilty for loving both parents. And this Bill of Rights is in place in order to ensure the well-being of children and youth.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That brings us to the end of our Your Space session. Here listed are a list of resources, which, as I've indicated earlier, are on the helpful links pane that you see in front of you. I would encourage you to take some time to peruse and as there is lots of information that you might find helpful. These are some of the resources that we have found helpful in preparing our talk today. And here's some information about Child and Adolescent Services and also in terms of how you can contact us. Thank you so much for your time. And Victoria and I hope that you found the information useful.
Thank you.